Hello, welcome to this video, which is a guide to completing the presentation for EPQ. My centre follows AQA, and so it's specifically designed for the AQA spec, but I'm sure it's applicable to the other specifications as well. So I'm going to go through what's required in the presentation, some tips on how to get marks and how it's assessed, and then looking at other examples of presentations, presentation skills in general, which is something as well as obviously the marks that hopefully you gain from completing your EPQ. So the presentation side of things is really important. Actually, it's vital. You can't submit your EPQ without having done a presentation. So as well as completing your learning log and your project queue or your production log and completing either your essay or your artifact, you also need to show evidence of a presentation. Now, that doesn't mean you need to send a video off of you presenting or even an audio clip, but you need to provide evidence in other ways, and that evidence comes from generally the production log or project queue, as I said. So there are a couple of sections on there: the presentation record part A, which is completed by you, the person completing the EPQ, and then the presentation record part B, which is completed by your supervisor. So those two documents show the example that you've done your presentation. As well as that, you should also include anything else you've used for your presentation. So as I'll say in a moment, the majority of presentations I've seen for the EPQ use PowerPoint, so people send in their slides, but not necessarily. People have done posters and they've sent clips to their posters, other software that you can use. So basically you need to provide evidence that you've done a presentation. The majority of that is documents, as I say, in your production log, but anything else you use as well. What needs to be included? Well, what format should it take? Well, you should be aiming for around 10 minutes. If you're massively under that or massively over that, you'd probably need to justify why you needed that extra time or couldn't fill it, but 10 minutes is a good time to aim for. And the stipulation is that you have to present to an audience. Now, okay, so that's a stipulation, but that's quite vague. An audience could be just your supervisor and one other person. It would need to be one other than your supervisor, just in case you had any queries or you wanted to question your supervisor's take on it. So at least two people, but in the majority of cases, people will present to a class. So lots of EPQs are people are set into groups. That's fine, you can do it to your groups. Some people do it to big audiences, so people invite parents in, and you could be presenting to a lecture theatre full of people, and that's absolutely fine as well. But you just need to think who that's going to be for your presentation, and you need to make a note of that. So in the top box of the presentation record part A, it talks about your intended audience, your intended format, how long it's going to take, what you're going to use. So as I said, lots of people tend to use PowerPoint. Absolutely fine. But you don't have to, and I maybe would encourage you maybe not to. Think about other ways you could do it. So could you use other software? There's Prezi, there's other presentation methods you can use. I've seen people create posters, like scientific posters, and that's been quite good, and talk people through it. There's a model called the marketplace. This tends to work quite well for artifacts. So if you've made something, or you've made a video and you want to play that video, and or you made a poster and you want to talk people through it, you've made a dress or a piece of clothing and you've actually got the clothing there and talking people through it, that can work quite well as well. You could have a marketplace not for an artifact, so for an essay, for example. So when we say presentation, the general rules are, it needs to last about 10 minutes and there needs to be a bit of an audience. And you need to plan this. You need to think who that's going to be, how you're going to present, what you're going to be doing. And as I say, all that goes in your presentation record part A, so the moderators know what you've done and they can see how you've done it. And as part of it, you need to have a question and answer section as well. And actually, I'll talk a bit more about that in a moment. Potentially, it's the most important part of the presentation, especially when it comes to marks. You need to be asked questions and you need to answer them. So it can't just be a video. You play the video of you speaking, you're done, because the question and answer section is really important. What to include, that's a question I get really regularly, and that's Yeah, very valid. In my eyes, really, there's almost two sections to it. The first half, you're talking about your project. So, what was your title topic? How did you come to that title topic? Talk a bit about your research. Where did you look? How did you find it? What sources were most valuable and why? What you found. So, you're talking to your audience. Assume your audience know nothing about your topic. That is 90% of the time, that is the case. You will know a lot more. You know, you've spent months looking at this topic. You will be the expert compared to the people that are listening, including your supervisor. So you need to tell them about it, tell them what you found, what the different sides maybe of the argument were, or the discussion, what the conclusions may be. So that's almost the first half of it, is your project, your topic, the thing that you're interested in. Almost the second half of it is the EPQ process itself. So you'd be talking about maybe deadlines and your planning and what you found easy and what you didn't, any skills that you gained from doing an EPQ that you may not have had before. Is this the first time you ever had to reference, for example? What you'll do differently next time, you know, reflecting back what went well and what didn't. Any advice to people doing it in the future. So there's almost the two halves to the presentation as I see it. There's no marks on its own for the presentation, so it's not as though the presentation is marked out of 10 or anything, but what it is, the whole project, everything that you do, your essay, your artifact, the production log, and the presentation, it's marked what we call holistically. So there are marks available: AO1 planning, AO2 resources, AO3 develop and realize, AO4 review, and they're available everywhere throughout the project, so you can get all of those marks from your presentation. So it might be good to structure your presentation in that way. You can talk about your topic title, how you chose it, your plan, your timing. How did you set yourself deadlines? That would all be that would come under the AO1 banner. You then talk about your resources. What sources did you use? What was most beneficial and why? And evaluate your sources. Why is this a good source compared to that one? That's AO2. AO3, yeah, what did you find? This is you talking about your project type thing. And then AO4, strengths, weaknesses, the skills that you've gained from it. So all those sorts of marks are available from the presentation. And in the second box of the presentation record, part A, you need to be talking about your content. What are you going to talk about? Why? How? And that's again the evidence that you've conducted this presentation. I mentioned before that the question and answer section is really important, and it is. So obviously you've done all that, you've planned your 10 minutes, you've got your slides or whatever it may be, you know who you're talking to, etc, etc, etc. You give your presentation. So question and answers, this is actually what your supervisor will be putting in your part B. Having said that, the best part B as I've seen, I said you don't necessarily audio record it or video record it and send it to AQA, and that's correct, but you may wish to video record it or audio record it so that the transcription, what's said in the question and answers, you can transcribe it. There's some software that might actually type it out for you anyway, and then that goes in your part B. I'm not necessarily expecting the supervisor to do that. You know, this is your project, so if you want to record it and get the transcript and send that transcript to your supervisor, then that would be a really good thing to do. That will really help them out, because in part B, presentation record part B, a big part of that is them talking about the questions that were asked and the answers that were given. A good supervisor would know which questions to ask. So it might be that they've had a flick through your production log already, they've seen your essay, and they know that maybe actually you haven't spoken enough about your resources, or you haven't evaluated your resources enough. So this is a chance to kind of compensate for that. They can ask you about that, and as long as your answers are good and detailed, then actually you're not losing out on the marks. So the presentation is a really good way to kind of mop up and tie up maybe any loose ends, certainly from a marking point of view, and getting all those assessment objectives in there, which is really good. So you need to be thinking about the sorts of questions that you may get, and obviously developing full answers for them. And again, they will probably be based on the assessment objectives, AO1, 2, 3 or 4, your planning. How did you plan? How did you manage your time? How did you document that? Maybe they've seen your documents and it's not documented, so actually you can talk about that here and still potentially gain some marks. The resources I mentioned before. develop and realize that, you know, you could be probed, you could be asked a bit more questions about your conclusions and how you came up with them, because actually, again, your supervisor might have seen what you've done and know that it might be a bit wishy-washy as it stands. You could clarify things there, and again, your review, they might ask you to look at strengths and weaknesses and skills you may have gained. So yeah, you need to prepare for that as well. These are tips generally just about presenting. Yeah, you need to think about your timings and your content. Practice. So don't have the first time that you're presenting is the time that you're actually doing it to your group. You should practice this in front of the mirror, or voice went there, in front of the mirror, or you could, you know, all the cool kids tend to record videos of PowerPoints on YouTube, and you could practice that, and so that will allow you to practice your timings, your content, and you can write about that in your presentation record part A. So it does ask you to look at modifications you made. You might have done it first time and you go 20 minutes, so you need to cut things down, or you're only talking for 3 minutes, so you need to add things. So it's all this reflection and the development and progress that you need to be looking at, and actually that's, yeah, credit worthy in part A. And yeah, you should be looking around at what good presentations look like. You can get advice. So a bit more on that here. So yeah, don't try to include too much on slides. Don't just read from slides. He said, reading from the side. But this is advice to you. Do as I say, not as I do. You can use cue cards to help if you want. So yeah, it's what people don't want in a presentation is for you just to have big, massive text on screen and pretty much you reading from that, because people can read anyway. So you should have maybe fewer words, pictures even, and you be able to expand on them in your presentation. That's better skills. And again, if you look around, you know, Google what's a good presentation, how do you deliver a good presentation. You can watch videos. There's some really good TED Talks about presenting well, and there's a good one on YouTube about Steve Jobs and how he's a good presenter and why and what skills. So you can watch those and use those as inspiration for your own. You should be doing that, and you can make reference to that again in presentation record part A. You need to be showing that you're planning your presentation. Well, that's really good planning. What are you going to do? What are you going to include? And you can mention the authors, the people speaking in the TED Talks, and use that. You also need to think about your voice, your pace, projecting well, the tone of your voice, the structure of your presentation. Making eye contact with your audience, any audience engagement. Are you going to be asking questions? Could you do something a bit digital, do a poll or something that keeps your listeners engaged? I'm sure you're all falling asleep now because I haven't engaged you, I've just spoken at you. Well, your presentation needs to be a bit more dynamic than this. And actually, as well as your questions and answers, if you have a look at presentation record part B, your supervisor is asked to comment on those sorts of things. How is your tone of voice? Have you thought about this? Again, that's something you can practice and you can write about in the bottom part of your presentation plan part A, is that actually you delivered it first and you were monotone talking from some slides and it wasn't very interesting. So actually you've now decided to be a bit more dynamic and talk to your audience to make your presentation a bit better. And as well as that, you know, you can use PowerPoints, and as I say, absolutely fine. But can you be a bit different? And actually, the presentations that I think back to that I've seen people present before, they're memorable because people have done something a bit different. They have interacted with the audience. I've seen people create really good, like, detailed posters, and actually they're talking people through these posters. I'm not talking crayons here. I'm talking they actually designed on a computer a poster, got it printed out in A1 or AO, and we're talking through it like a proper, you know, scientific conference, and it was great and it's memorable. So maybe think about that. Best of luck.